So I want to talk in large part tonight, we might call it simply the power of witnesses. So I want to talk a little bit about just the transformation that took place in my own life, which will be rather revealing perhaps to some of you, but some of you will be able to relate to some of these on one level, some of you won't, but hopefully all of you will be able to relate on some angles. So I really want to talk about heroes. And I'll start by talking about a little bit about my own life growing up. So that was my grandfather. There's three men that I've known in my life who've scared the living daylights out of me. He's one of them. Or intimidated would be the better way to say it. So two of them I want to talk about tonight. The other one, for those of you who work at Ford and remember Ed Lundy, you remember him. He's the third. I'm not going to talk about Ed tonight, but Ed was also passionately Catholic. In fact, someone once joked he had two wives, Ford Motor Company and the Catholic Church. Ed was a really significant influence on my life coming into the priesthood. But this is a man named Lyle Fife. He's my mom's dad. So Grandpa Lyle, anybody ever remember watching Magnum P.I.? So Magnum always used to wear a tiger hat. Talk about his uncle Lyle. That's him. So Selleck's my cousin, whatever times removed, second time removed maybe. But that's the guy he was talking about, and this was a man who was born in 1900, and born in Canada, grew up on a farm. By the time I got to know him, I'm born in 65, so he's already 65. And he lived in Grosse Pointe. He was a rags to riches man. He had, I think, maybe a sixth grade education. Mind like a computer. Very successful. Started an electric company called Fife Electric. He ended up putting in the lights at what was then Briggs Stadium, not then Tiger Stadium, and then torn down. In the 1940s, with a set of other folks, he decided to purchase a football team in the area called the Lions. They used to win then. So he used to go down to Lakeland, Florida, and practice with the Tigers all the time. This guy he was a great athlete. Him and one of my uncles, his sons, they would always win father and son golf tournaments. I mean, he was just an extraordinary man who did everything seemingly well. He had scars. He divorced, actually his wife, my grandmother, divorced him, which in 1949 was big news, especially when you were the president and the principal owner of the Detroit Lions. He and my mom had a major falling out. In fact, I don't think she'll mind, but I don't think she's watching for that matter. But she will, because she sees these things. And she talks about this all the time. So he wasn't invited to her wedding. My mom and dad were married in 1950. I think she sent back every gift he sent. I don't think they talked for upwards of at least 10 years. And then my dad played a pretty significant role in kind of reconciling them. And then my mom ended up taking care of her dad most of the last 10 years or so of his life. He went into a nursing home. And so this wasp as you can get, in Grosse Pointe, with all sorts of prejudices, they all just came down. So this man who would never talk to a black man or a Jewish man or a woman, his two best friends when he was in a nursing home, one was black, one was Jewish. They all sat there and wore their bibs at meals. I mean, God just has a way of knocking down all our walls, huh? Anyway, he used to scare me to no end, but I used to love to sit at his feet and listen to him tell stories because he was born in 1900, and because sports was such a big part of his life, and I had an affinity for sports as a kid, I would just listen to him tell stories. And so if anything happened in Detroit sports history, he was there. He was there at the 1909 World Series when the Tigers played the Pittsburgh Steelers, or the Pittsburgh Pirates, and Cobb and Wagner went at it. So he used to tell me all these accounts of all these people who I grew up just idolizing. He'd tell me great stories about being at the perfect game that Charlie Robertson threw at Tiger Stadium. He was there the day Lou Gehrig's consecutive game streak ended at Briggs Stadium. All the great things that he would talk about with the Lions. Hard to believe, isn't it? Like, great things with the Lions. You read clips about the Lions back in the 40s and history, and you know, they're the most profitable franchise, they're the most successful franchise. They're the leading television revenue franchise, and you're like, this is the Lions? Like, what are we talking about here? So, in large part because of him, my mind was shaped to aspire to emulate people that I would hear him talk about. And everybody he talked about was an athlete. This is the second guy who used to intimidate me. So this is my godfather. Johnny Green was his name, still is his name. Please God, he's in heaven now. So Johnny was from Pittsburgh, went to the University of Michigan. He was the captain of the wrestling team, and then played football for U of M as well. Played in the Chicago College All-Star game in, I think, 42 or 43, and then he played for the Lions for 7 years. So he used to wear 81 before another guy named Calvin began to wear that number. When he retired, he was the leading receiver in Lions history, both for yards, for touchdowns, longest reception for a touchdown in Lions history until not too long ago. Just an amazing guy who was obviously a great athlete, but also really quick. Like, lightning quick mind. Remember the game Simon? Some of us are old enough to remember that. It was this game that the lights would light up, and then you would have to follow the pattern that it would go around. So he broke the game. We were down in Mexico one time, and we're playing the game, and we're all playing, and he's just watching. We're like, come on, try it, try it. He's like, I don't want to try it. Try it. I don't want to try it. Try it. Okay, I'll try it. He had like a minute and a half. He had like every single one. He got the whole thing, and the game broke. Like, thanks a lot. Mean Uncle John. So because of guys like this, and you know, he tells stories. So he played both ways in the NFL, 44 to 50. No helmets, right? Finally, they got leather helmets. They didn't throw flags in the 40s, right? So he would watch games and just go ballistic, you know, as he would see penalties called. He just died a few years ago. So he was a tough guy, right? So because of him and my grandfather, people like this, these were my heroes. So I grew up, even though I was born in 65, my life was just filled with old-time, especially baseball, trivia, right? My mom used to pray that the memory I had for baseball would be used for something a little bit more productive one day. Yeah, it's coming true slowly, but it's on its way. So, you know, Babe Ruth's one of my heroes, even though he's in a Red Sox uniform there. Jimmy Fox was one of my heroes. My biggest hero as a kid was this guy. Anybody know who that is? Yeah, Lou Gehrig. So Lou Gehrig was a remarkable baseball player for the New York Yankees. Went to Columbia University, and up until Cal Ripken had the longest consecutive game streak for a player in Major League Baseball. Played with broken ankles, broken feet, broken fingers, concussions. His nickname was the Iron Horse. Just a remarkable guy. So I grew up hearing stories about him because my grandfather saw him play. My dad was born in 24, so he saw Gehrig kind of towards the end of his career. Then, you know, people like this, Bob Gibson, was a little bit more my time. Lou Brock was the guy who I just really loved when I was younger. Christy Mathewson. I mean, these are all people that nobody in here is old enough to even remember, right? But these were my heroes. Cobb was somebody who I despised, but I used to love to hear about. Mickey Mantle, Yogi Berra, great lines, right? Yogi's always got all these tremendous expressions, like, nobody ever goes to that restaurant, it's always crowded. Who cares if we're lost, we're making great time. 50% of the game is 90% mental. Things like that, right? Joe DiMaggio. So these are the guys that I loved. I'm being in, because of my dad's job, I would travel with him for certain perks, you know. So my dad's from upstate New York, so I'm a huge Yankee fan. So when the Yankees first started going back to the World Series in the 70s after a long drought, we would like fly to the game, right? Because Chrysler was one of the sponsors for, I think it was NBC at the time, showing the game. So we'd, you know, he'd pick me up after school. Son, we're going to go to the game tonight. Oh, okay. So we'd fly to the game, fly home afterwards, go to school the next day, talk about the game. Life was good growing up. I mean, there were some perks, you know. Charles Manson was also part of our life. That was not so good, but flying to the Yankee games, that was pretty cool. So 1976 World Series, I'm there with my dad and my brother. We're sitting in this little box. We got all these old-time baseball greats. So Joe Sewell is the name of a guy who used to play mostly for the Cleveland Indians back in the 20s and 30s. And so we meet him. So I'm 11 years old. Sewell was probably late 60s at the time. So I'm this, anybody in here 11? Yeah, right. So I'm 11, right? You know, like mentally, yeah. But so my dad introduces me to him, and then my dad says, "Son, I'll bet you can tell Mr. Sewell his lifetime batting average." I'm like, 312. And he looks at me like, he says, "I'll bet you know how many times he struck out." 114. And this old man looks at this little punk and like, "Kid, what is wrong with you? Like, get a life, will you? You know, like, it's a game." You know, it's like the Star Trek thing on Saturday Night Live. It was a show. You ever even kissed a girl? So, anyway, those were, when I was a child, and I share that because our witnesses in this country growing up, if they're not these kinds of people, maybe they were these kinds of people. MacArthur, Eisenhower, or maybe it was a guy like this. Or we all remember hanging out with this guy. For a lot of us, especially as Catholics, it was him before a lot of things became known about his life. Peggy Noonan, who I know a number of you read or remember, Peggy used to work in Reagan's administration. She was one of his speechwriters. She's a great author. And she wrote a column years ago now where she just said something to the effect of, it was right around either Memorial Day or maybe it was 4th of July. It was one of the national holidays. And she was commenting on how Protestant the roots of our country are and the effect of that on us for heroes. And what she went on to talk about was, if you go to Europe, even today, pagan Europe, I mean, unabashedly pagan Europe, the pagan Europeans still know the saints. They celebrate saints' days. They have days off because of saints. Streets are named after saints. Their experience and knowledge of history is just far superior to ours. But as a country, because Europe has Catholic roots, Europe is a Catholic entity. Its whole founding is Catholic. Not so with us. And so because of that, our heroes tend not to be saints. We just weren't exposed to them on a national level. You might have been exposed to them in your family growing up. I wasn't, in large part because my family wasn't all Catholic. But so we're exposed to these people, you know, politicians, or to celebrities, or to athletes, or to generals, or things of that sort. And good grief, it certainly plays out now with what we see in the culture. I mean, the mere fact that you're on television, or that you made a movie, or that you made a, you know, a new hit song, or what does that matter with regards to whether or not you're worthy of emulating? You're just famous, whatever that means. You're in the news. But the mere fact that you're in the news doesn't mean that you're worthy of being imitated. You might be. And if you are, fantastic. But the amount of public opinion that's shaped by people who are considered important for really no reason is a little scary. But that was me, and maybe that was some of you too. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that at the table. Who were your heroes growing up? But my heroes were athletes. And I thought, I mean, my dream when I was a kid, I wanted to play shortstop for the Yankees. Like that was heaven to me, to walk out onto Yankee Stadium and to play shortstop. I thought that was really making it. I thought that was a great life. I thought that's it. I couldn't imagine anything better than that, personally. And then slowly a transformation of values started to take place in my life. And it happens in the lives of all the saints, actually, or most of the saints. And I'd call it something like this, the power of witnesses. So, for example, during small groups, John's going to be out in the hallway filming testimonies. We do this all the time for Alpha. So he just sets up camera down at the end of the hallway, do a little 2-minute testimony. In that case, what's Alpha done in your life? Or here, what transformation have you seen in your own life as a result of rerouting? Why do we do this? We do it because the power of testimony is huge. Because you can say in a minute something, and it's because it's you and not somebody in a collar or somebody in a veil, but because it's you in a sweatshirt giving testimony to God, boom, people listen. They go, well, maybe that could be me. So we capture these because the power of witnesses is indeed so powerful. So there's a man named Ignatius of Loyola. So some of you know Ignatius. Ignatius is the founder of the Jesuits. We're trying to find the time to show this, but there's a new movie that came out within the last year and a half, maybe 2 years, called Ignacio de Loyola. And we're going to try to show it here in the church sometime over the summer, perhaps. Because Ignatius is this remarkably powerful story of a man, much like I just described my own life, except his was an athlete's, who knew nothing about the saints. And because he knew nothing about the saints, he really knew nothing about the Lord. And so he was caught up in the things of the world. In his time, in Spain, in the 16th century, it was the understanding of chivalry. So he had all these aspirations to be, and he was, a great soldier. And he wanted to be a great soldier because he wanted to win the attraction of women. So he was a very vain man. Some of the things that he did after he was wounded in a battle to try to, get healthier, make clear his vanity. If you break your leg and you walk with a limp and you're afraid that that's going to make you unattractive to a woman, so you have him re-break it so that you won't limp, you got an ego issue, right? So he had an ego issue or a vanity issue. But so this man's totally caught up in the affairs of the world. He wants to be great as he understands greatness. I want to be a great soldier. I want to win battles. I want to defend my queen. And I want to win the hand of a pretty woman. Actually, the more pretty women, the better. That was his life. And then Ignatius has this experience. And he's wounded in a battle. And he's convalescing in his home. Some of us, anybody go on the pilgrimage that we took to Spain a few years ago? Just an extraordinary encounter. So we had a chance to go visit his home where he convalesces. So we're there around his bed. We said Mass actually in the room in this house where he grew up. And as he's lying there, he's asking for the lives of knights to be brought to him. He wanted something to read. He's lying in bed for months. He can't move. So he wanted something to pass the time. So he asked for stories about the people who he considered to be heroes. And somebody in his family conspired not to bring him that, but to bring him instead a book about the life of Jesus and a book of the lives of the saints. Neither of which he had any interest in reading. But boredom has a way of getting to you. And so he begins to read them. And he begins to be fascinated by the life of Jesus, and he begins to be fascinated by the lives of the saints, most especially Dominic and Francis and Benedict. And as he sees their lives and he recognizes what he has inside him is exactly what's motivating them. They have this desire to be great, to be noble, to be heroic, to do something remarkable with their lives. But what they had, which he didn't have, was they understood that greatness and nobility and heroism was connected with the Lord. That didn't mean you had to go become a priest or a nun. It just meant that, the way we would say it now, you had to sign the card, right? And they did. And so he's reading this, and the impact of their stories is so profound that he ends up saying to himself, well, why can't God do in me what he did in Francis? Or why can't he do in me what he did in Dominic? Not as if, oh, I think I can do that. Not a boastful way, but like all of a sudden, the things that used to hold an allure for him, they just kind of faded away, and he realized, no, that's what I want. It was like God tapped him on the shoulder and said, I made you with the desire to be great. And this is what greatness looks like. And he recognized it, and he signed the card. And then he becomes the founder of the Jesuits. And he becomes one of the leading figures in the Catholic Church in the 16th century. I was at a conference back in October, November, down at Notre Dame, and they were talking about recapturing the Christian imagination. And there were two stories that I heard that just had a huge impact on me. This is really important, especially for parents with kids still at home, and maybe especially with boys. So there was a woman giving one of the talks. She's a professor, an author. She has, 3, 4 children maybe. So she's deeply Catholic. I mean, she teaches theology. So she's obviously imparting the faith to her kids, whatever. No effect, or minimal effect. They got transferred over to England. They lived in York, I believe it was. And so they lived, actually, the kids went to school in a school which, in the 16th century, when the Elizabethan persecution's going on in England and the Catholics are being martyred, was where a lot of the Catholics were arrested and executed. And the kids began to hear these stories. And they were captured by them, most especially the lives of the martyrs. One of the stories that captured them is a mom, actually. Her name's St. Margaret Clitheroe. So, thanks to Hollywood and different things, we may have a particular image of Queen Elizabeth, which doesn't exactly jive with history for us as Catholics. And we want to be careful not to paint with broad strokes, but if you're a Catholic living in England at the time of Elizabeth, you're seditious. You're a traitor to the country. And so you would either be imprisoned, and particularly if you were a priest, you would be executed. And the way they executed them was horrible. We'll talk about that in a minute. This is a remarkable woman. So you can see her standing, and then to her, right off her left hand, you can see a chalice, maybe? Everybody see that? Yeah. So Margaret used to hide priests in her home. She used to have what they call priest holes. I know people in this state who have built priest holes for when they come after us and have told us where we can go because they might come after us. Well, she did that. I mean, this was a real thing. Priests would go and they would hide in their homes behind false doors, false walls, whatever, so that they could celebrate Mass, which was forbidden. And people would gather in the home, and they would celebrate, and they would have to do it all, obviously with guards everywhere. Well, she gets apprehended one time. She had, I think, 2 children, if I remember correctly. Her husband was not Catholic. And she realized that if she was to testify in the midst of being on trial, she would put her children's lives in jeopardy. And so she never said anything. She refused to answer questions, if I remember correctly. She gets, she's martyred by being pressed to death. So they placed her on top of a rock, a sharp rock under her back, and then they put a piece of wood on top of her, and then they just started to pile rocks on top of the wood until it pressed her into the stone, and it went through her body, and she died. Her son becomes a priest. Her daughter becomes religious, even though it's still forbidden. That's the power of witnesses. See, we don't talk about stories like this. We don't think people can handle them. We think they're they are graphic, right? But we underestimate the impact that hearing about real heroes can do on a young imagination, or in Ignatius's case, on an older imagination. But it helps you realize what greatness looks like. Another testimony at that same conference was from a man from Ireland. As soon as this woman got done talking about the impact of the lives of the martyrs, especially the English martyrs, on her kids, now all of a sudden her kids are gung-ho on fire. Because they've seen in front of them examples of people who persevered, who lived great lives, who were under tremendous strains, who never caved. And it helps them realize, I think this is about more than just, like coming to church. So she gets done. As soon as she's done, this gentleman stands up. He says, I'd just like to make a comment. He was from Ireland. So he's a priest now. And he described his own life. Say he grew up in this one particular community, rebellious kid, really no interest in Jesus. They moved at a certain point, maybe he's middle teens, 16, 17, something like that. And they moved to a neighborhood where right across the street from his house was what they called the Mass hole in the area. So Ireland as well, it's forbidden to celebrate Mass. Was. So he started to hear stories about what happened there. And so just like in Margaret's house, in this field in Ireland, this secluded place, Catholics would gather at night, clandestinely, to celebrate Mass. And there was always a lookout, keeping watch for the redcoats who would come and arrest them. And they would scatter the people, but they would martyr the priest. They'd kill the priest, right? Because if you kill the priest, there's no Mass, there's no church. So there would always be a lookout. And this guy heard the story of several instances where the lookout saw the redcoats coming, ran back to the group, said, they're coming, grabbed the priest, changed clothes with the priest so that he would be arrested and the priest would go free. And he knew when he was being arrested that he was going to be hung till he was unconscious, drawn, quartered, and burned. And the guy said, when I started hearing those stories, I realized this guy or these men, they weren't dying for bread and wine. I'm in. Where do I sign? Not like, I got a death wish, where do I sign? That's a man. That's conviction. That's faith. That's all in. That's the power of witnesses. I mentioned the impact that can have on kids, and especially boys. How many people here use the Magnificat? So the saints of the day. So shameful confession, even now. I mean, when they get to the saint of the day, the back, kind of like the obscure saints, the ones that are not quite so known. If it's not a martyr, I don't read it. If it's a martyr, I just can't like get enough, because it just feeds me. It inspires me. It calls me on to greatness. It reminds me what it is that we're made for. It reminds me that the faith is not a game. This is not a joke. This is not something to do on Sundays because we don't have anything better to do. No, this is truth, and it's so true. It's worth dying for. And God gives off-the-chart grace to these men and women who are listed in the halls of the martyrs, who are now from heaven, not watching, but interceding for us in all the different ways that you and I are being asked to give witness. Please God, no one here is going to be faced with the decision to be a red martyr, although some of us might. But we're all called to be daily white martyrs, to be daily witnesses. You know, one of the great saints used to say, a thought comes into my head to say something about somebody at work, and I don't say it. I was a martyr for Jesus. I'm away in business, and a thought comes into my head to do something to indulge an appetite. I resist it. I was a martyr for Jesus. I had an opportunity to take something that no one would ever know. I resist it. I was a martyr for Jesus. These people call us on to be able to do little acts of martyrdom in our daily lives. So in my own life, I think what happened to me, like a lot of us, saints, I only knew saints because churches were named after them. That was about it. I didn't know anything. I don't think I knew anything about any saints until I went to seminary, quite frankly. They just weren't even on my map. I didn't know why I'd even bother to spend time with them. But if you move to Rome, as I did, and you live there, you walk into St. Agnes because, there's her head. All right. You walk into St. Sebastian's catacombs because, there's relics of St. Sebastian. You go into St. Peter's and you go down to the level of the Scavi, and it's St. Peter's because, those are his bones. There's Paul's head. There's Catherine of Siena's head. There's Francis Xavier's arm. There's Ignatius's body. You're just surrounded by these people, and you can't help not learn them. So you would just walk into a church, and the church is built where it was built, oftentimes because this is where they died. So St. Lawrence, a story that tragically we just kind of laugh at. Lawrence who's grilled alive, and he kind of jokingly, according to history, he says to his executor, "I'm done on this side, you can turn me over." Ha, 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 ha. Really? Like that's your response? But that was his response. Well, St. Lawrence is built in Rome because that's where Lawrence was grilled alive. So you get there and you pray, and this is the value of pilgrimage. You go to these places and you're like, it happened here. Like this is the spot where this man or this woman gave witness. And they're alive. And they're calling us on. And they're saying, you can do better. That's how I always experience the martyrs. I can't stand the martyrs because they just remind me how easily I can settle in my life over and over and over again. And they never settled. At least ultimately they never settled, right? So my heroes, they went from Gehrig and Ruth and DiMaggio and Maris and Manel to this guy who I had a chance to meet I don't even know how many times. This is, if there's 10 greater figures who ever lived in human history than John Paul II, I don't know who they are. He's got to be somewhere in the top 10. Unbelievable athlete, playwright, actor, poet, philosopher, theologian. We would go to his audiences pretty much every week and sit there, or we'd go to Mass with him. We'd used to go to Mass in his private chapel. So it'd be like us and 10 people and Pope John Paul. And then he would greet people afterwards. And, he didn't have little prepared notes to, say some words in all the, the Geburg, here's some Polish. How do I say that? He just started, the guy spoke, 11, 12 languages fluently. Just oozed out of him. And the experience of meeting him, I've said this many times, I know, but to meet him and to talk to him, and I remember things that he said to me. It was the impression of a man standing in front of you saying, you know, you don't have anywhere near the skills that I have, but you can still be great. So be great. You just felt called on by being with him. Got to meet this woman. She spoke to us one time. It was kind of like this. You just heard this voice, you know. You must be holy. You must be holy. I mean, you're like, who is that? Where's that coming from? You know, she was. I got a picture shaking her hand. I'm like this. But 120 guys in a chapel, all overachievers. Nobody's moving. Like, and she had this, you know, like, really delicate way of talking. I describe meeting her. It's kind of like she would stroke your cheek and then do that. So she would say, you are a priest. You will always be a priest. Always. Even in hell. Like, thanks. I think. This man, whose relic we have upstairs, Maximilian Kolbe. So we've taken groups to Poland. I know some others have gone with Father Stanley to Poland. Others have had a chance to go there for work or whatnot. Kolbe's another one of these remarkable men. Franciscan, 2 doctorates by the age of 25. Has the largest printing press or publication in Poland at the time of his running this particular publication. Moves to Japan. I can never remember if he's in Nagasaki or Hiroshima. Does anybody remember? Nagasaki. He builds the monastery on what the Japanese said was the wrong side of the mountain. It survives because it was on that side of the mountain. Kolbe's arrested, brought to Auschwitz, and is, you know, among his words entering into Auschwitz with his brothers are forget not love. That's why that's underneath the relic upstairs. So the relic we have is of his hair because his body was incinerated. When he was in seminary, they write reviews on all of us when we're in seminary. The review of him when he was in the seminary from his superior to the person who was going to take charge of him the next year was, this is a future saint. And he was just a remarkable man who gives his life for another by dying in a starvation bunker. He takes the place of a man. If you don't know anything about Kolbe's life, I can't encourage you enough to read about it. Just a real hero. Or a man like this. This is Alfred Delp. So Delp's a contemporary of Kolbe's. He's a German Jesuit, put to death in 1945. I was just saying to Deacon Dave, his last words, so he's hung by piano wire. The Nazis, the SS, when they would interrogate him, they would often say to him, you know, you Jesuits and Catholics, you have one thing in common with us in the SS. And he would say, what's that? And they would say, you both, or we both want the whole man. And indeed, God does. Anyway, he's on his way to being executed. He turns to his chaplain, and he says to him, in 30 minutes, I'm going to know more than you do. Just an extraordinary guy. Here's another image of him. Or this man, Francis, who tragically is known for loving animals. Nothing wrong with animals. But if that's all you know about Francis, so Francis has the wounds of Jesus in his hands. The stigmata, the first person that we know to have that gift. It's prompted by a prayer that Francis makes to God one time where he says to the Lord, Lord, I want to know the love that moved you to leave heaven to save us. And the Lord overwhelms him with the experience of his love, and he marks him with the wounds of his own body. And then this man, Augustine, who we talked a little bit about this past week. Not sure why I'm drawing on it now. Chris, what am I doing wrong here? Help, I need you. What am I doing? Or you can control it from your phone. Do it from your phone. So anyway, these are the great cloud of witnesses, right? So remember Hebrews 12? Maybe we can pop that right back up there. Here's the text from this past week that proves so significant to me. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let's also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely. And let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us. We can stop right there. Here's the image that's in my head. It's this image. See, the saints have left the field. Whether it's Augustine or Delp or Colby or my dad or your parents or those people in your life who are your heroes, they're gone. They're gone in the sense that they're no longer running the race here now. They're in the stands, but as they've left the field, that's what they've done. They've handed the baton backwards. They've passed it. And the question to you and to me is, will we grab it? Because there's no one else to grab it. Our choice is either to grab it or it's going to fall. That's really the question I think that's posed in front of us right now. That's what this whole exercise has been about. This whole mission or pilgrimage or however we want to try to think about rerouting, it's all been for that purpose. Remember, the origin of this is to respond to the Archbishop's desire, which is Jesus' desire, that we would go about the work of the Great Commission and become an archdiocese that's missionary in purpose and a parish that's missionary in purpose. That we would carry on the work, each according to our state of life. Each doesn't mean you got to go all, sell everything and go to the monastery. You as an artist, as a single person, as a widow, as a widower, as a married person, as a divorced person, whatever state of life we find ourselves in, will we drop the net, sign the card, say, Lord, use me. I want to run. I want to carry on what's gone on before me. I want to live so that my picture's on that screen one day. Not out of ego. I could care less if anybody ever remembers me. On one hand. On the other hand, I want tons of people to remember me, only because somehow you and I helped people to know him. That's the only reason. So my mom can look at my dad as he's lying in a casket and say to him, because of you, I know God. You have made him visible to me. Because of you. I believe, because I've encountered him myself personally, but a huge part of me encountering him was the witness that you gave to me to help me understand he's faithful, he's gentle, he's compassionate, he's generous, he's merciful, he's kind, he loves, he's faithful, he's always there, he's a rock. And you've put that into flesh for me. One of the great French authors of the late 20th, early 21st century, or 19th, 20th century, said, there's only one tragedy in life. The only tragedy is not to become a saint. Because if I don't become a saint, that means I'm going to hell. Everyone in heaven's a saint. And that's the choice in front of us. And it starts with a decision. As simple as, okay, Lord, I don't know what I'm in for, but I know you and I trust you. And I know you're good. And I see you in contrast to the enemy whose desire is clearly to keep me from the happiness for which I was made. And so without even knowing or having to know where you're going to lead me, I'm in. I will do whatever you want. You gave me all these gifts. Here, use them. You gave me this time. Whatever's left, use it. You gave me the resources that I have. Use it. It's all yours. People who live that way are so attractive and so inspiring. And they show us that it's possible. And so one of the things I just want to encourage us to do, maybe it's in these summer months coming up when we've got, some of us anyway, we try to make some more time for leisure. Find great stories of saints. Don't read hagiography. You know what that is? That's, so so-and-so was born, they were baptized, and they never sinned, they lived a great life, God took them into heaven. That's not helpful, Nobody ever did that, first of all, except for Mary, but it's just not helpful. I need somebody who's struggled with the things that I've struggled. So get to know, you struggle with chastity, get to know Margaret of Cortona. Or Mary of Egypt. Ooh, you really want to get to know somebody, know Mary of Egypt. Mary of Egypt was a prostitute, not because she needed the money, because she loved pleasure. She didn't charge. She went on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land because she heard that there would be a lot of men on the ship, and she considered it to be a particularly enticing thing to seduce a Christian. This is a woman who's got some issues. Okay? But some of us here, all of us here, right? But some of us here got those issues. It's like, here's an example of somebody who lived just enslaved by the passions of the flesh, couldn't say no. All of a sudden, she has this amazingly powerful encounter with the Lord at Holy Sepulchre and Our Lady, goes through a massive conversion, repents, and is now this incredible intercessor for people who struggle with chastity. Or Augustine. Or Margaret of Cortona. Or maybe your issues, whatever. Maybe it's greed. Find saints that you can identify with, and as you're looking for stories, ask somebody. Go to Catholic bookstore. I mean, we got 2 in the area that are fantastic, right? We got Our Lady of Grace over at Domino's Farms. We got Matea's over in Garden City. We got lots of resources to get our hands on good stuff. Even something as simple as CatholicOnline.org, the Saint of the Day, the extended bio. Just read that and see their lives and be inspired. So here's some questions to think about. So there's really 3 for the maybe it's 4 for the table. I mean, one of them's not for the table. So who are the heroes of my life and why? We can talk about that. That's an easy question, right? The second one, this is something maybe to reflect on these days and weeks ahead. What do I need to do to become a hero? Jesus says no one lights a lamp and puts it underneath a basket, right? Because that would be stupid, right? That's you he's talking about. That's me he's talking about. I have lit you on fire, he says, so that those who are in the house would see. So what needs to happen for my life to shine more brightly? What do I need to do to become a hero? What do I need to put down? What do I need to pick up? Third, this is going to be a huge focus for us going forward in the next 2 years. How do I move from being a consumer to a real member of this parish who takes responsibility for my life as a disciple? I'll tell you 2 quick anecdotes relating to that. Somebody walked out of church a couple weeks ago, very complimentary about what we've been doing in rerouting. It's obviously making a huge impact. They didn't mean this negatively at all. They meant it very positively. The question was, what are you guys going to do next? It's a really good question. It's the wrong question. We're working on some things, trust me, but you know what the right question is? What are you going to do now? That's the question. See, it's easy to kind of get into a consumer mentality to church. We just come, we get fed. And then we just keep eating and eating and eating. So related to eating, here's another instance of this consumer thing. So this is week 11, right? We've had 11 dinners. You know what we've spent? 24 grand. You know what we've collected? $1,200. Now I don't say that to point a finger, to accuse, to indict, condemn, nothing. That's an example of we've acclimated ourselves to not only like we're going to get food, but it's just sandwiches tonight? Yeah, like you'd be amazed at the comments that we hear. Wow, soup was kind of bland. Really? But see, here's the problem. Obviously, it's not occurring to many of us that this costs. It's just kind of, it's not occurring to us that our brothers and sisters who make time to come here early, set up, stay late, they're still here. They're going to take down everything, right? They've given up Wednesday nights for 11 weeks in a row for nothing. They just want to be here. They just want to serve. We should be looking at them going, hey, who do I talk to say, I want to take their place? We should all be queuing up, right? I got next time. What do you need me to do? I can do it. I got time. But it's not, something's not happening. The big question for us right now that we keep asking ourselves is, we've been doing Alpha for 4 years. We've been doing things like this we've been doing things like this longer. Our constant question amongst ourselves as the pastoral team, where's the fruit? Where's the fruit? Why isn't Plymouth on fire? Why is it still a small number of people who continue to serve? Why is it still a small number of people who continue to give? Why is it, where's the fruit? And again, trust me, I don't mean that at all to sound condemning. It's not, Jesus never condemns. I'm certainly not going to. But he does want me to be convicted. We're so accustomed to having a buffet set in front of us and going through the line and feeding. But these next couple of years, it's all about getting on the other side of the line and doing the feeding. Because that's what it means to be missionaries. Starting here with ourselves, going out into the community wherever we can do it, being on the lookout for opportunities to share the faith wherever we go. Does that make sense? I think it's something that we're going to ponder and talk often about. But it starts with maybe that question, what do I need to do to become a hero? And that even begins with, if I haven't signed that card yet, I got a thing in the mail today from a guy in St. Louis. He came to Mass here 2 weeks ago. He mailed his card in. This is a guy in St. Louis, right? He wanted us to see this. And he made a point of saying, learn from the Rerouting series. I've used this discipleship videos that the parish has done from my small group. Had the opportunity to visit here, received a card. This is not an easy task, as I like to be in control, he says. Yet of what should I be afraid? So please take the signed card and offer it up at the Easter Vigil. He's from St. Louis, people. Have you looked at the urns? We've said all along, we think we got somewhere between 400 and 500 intentional disciples here. People go, where'd you get that number from? It's just, that's our experience of who really is committed and gives and serves and does what. I'll bet if we tallied up the cards, that's what we'd come up with. Why? What's holding me back? Meanwhile, the witnesses, the heroes, they're in the stands, handing the baton. What's keeping me from grabbing it? What am I afraid of? That might be the question to start with. Because it's a rich life. There's nothing like this life. Even though you don't have a clue where you're going next. Because we sure as heck don't have a clue where we're going next. We just know we've left one thing behind. We're going to something new, but we don't know what it is. We're going to be Catholic as can be, but we don't know what we're going to do. So to the question, what are you guys going to do next? No clue. Pray for us, but we'll talk about that in the time coming. Really, for these next couple of years, what is he really asking us to be? And so here's what I'd encourage you to pray with, if I can. Genesis chapter 12. Father John's going to use this a little bit this week. He's preaching all the masses. Genesis 12, verses 1 to 4. So this is the call of Abraham. And the call of Abraham begins with the Lord saying to Abraham, or to Abram at the time, his name's not been changed. Abram, rise and go to a land that I will show you. Anybody remember how old Abraham was? 75. So 70, you're figuring 75, it's time to unpack, get the home in Florida, chill out, play some golf. No, Abraham's life just begins. And so Abraham leaves. He leaves everything he's familiar with, and he heads to a place he has no idea where he's going. And that passage, I think that passage is really significant for the Archdiocese. I think it's really significant for us as a parish. We've left something behind. We haven't left Catholicism. People forget that kind of. But we've left kind of like a 1950s mentality behind, if you will. We're very much trying to grow in an intense, what should have been always the case, and it was in some places in the 50s, but an intense encounter with Jesus and very much outward focus. We want to tell people about this because we're convinced this is true and that this is what you're hungry for. So, and we're trying to find ways to do things. And we have no idea where we're going. We just trust the one who's calling. And we're confident enough in, the teaching and the wisdom of the church to know that we're not, out on an island somewhere. There's a set of parishes that we talk pretty regularly with around the country, quite frankly, who are trying to do things like we're trying to do, with the Eucharist very much at the center of it. Like, where can you go where you're going to... We do Mass ad orientem and we do praise and worship. I mean, they don't usually gel for most places, like, oh, that's the traditional place. Oh, apparently not. They're doing Eucharistic procession with, like drums. Like, okay, we don't want to be pigeonholed because the church can't be pigeonholed, right? I mean, Jesus says we want to be like the steward who brings out of the storehouse both the new and the old. Always faithful. Always totally in line with all that the church calls us to be and to do. We're just trying to find new ways of doing this. And part of the old mutated DNA is that it was up to the deacons and the pastoral staff to do this. But that's mutated DNA. Healthy DNA, we're all in. We all got different roles and responsibilities, but we're all in. Because the church can't be what the church is supposed to be if it's only the people who are ordained or the people that we're paying, 75 cents an hour doing the work. So remember Nicky Gumbel? If you went through Alpha, Nicky's got a great line where he's talking about the church. He says the church is like a football game. It's 105,000 people who are in desperate need of exercise, watching 11 men running on our field who are in desperate need of a rest. And that's true. Like, man, we'll share the work in a heartbeat. Someone just caught me and said, I got an idea. I said, great. Present it to me. I mean, we're looking for people. So, Angela, are you still here? Where'd you leave? Angela's filming. Great. You should all be in line to get filmed. So, Brian Hill came to me Brian and Tom Baston came like 10 years ago to sit down to talk about this men's fellowship thing that they'd been going to at the church down the street. They said, we think we should do this here. I said, great, make it happen. All they wanted was an okay, and all I needed to give them was an okay. And they ran with it, and look what it's become. 100+ guys, Wednesday mornings, who pretty soon we're going to call to come out of the basement. Because we need you, brothers, badly. But that time's coming soon. But that's a man with an apostolic vision. He had an idea. I don't need you to do anything, Father. I just need you to tell me we can do this. Do it. Boom, he made it happen. So someone just caught me in the hallway. I got something I think we should do. Great, make it happen. That's how this church is going to become what it's supposed to be. It's how the church in the U.S. is going to become what it's supposed to be. As the Lord puts ideas in your mind, bring them to us. Say, I got the people, I got the vision, I got a plan. I might need some guidance every once in a while, but we'll do the work. Great. Do it. We'd love it. Because that's how this happens. That's what's needed. So let's continue to pray and to think. Pray with that passage in Genesis, huh? I'd encourage you to do that. Just see the Lord calling you. Hey, leave everything that's familiar. Trust me. I got you. It's all right. And then get in line with this whole great community of people who are just kind of eager to put our hands in the Lord's hands and let him take us wherever he wants to take us. And along the way, to pick up as many people as we can and bring them in, because that's what we want to do. We're trying to be like one of those big cattle catchers, just like bring everybody in. Because the Lord wants everybody in his house. And they're only going to get here if we invite them. Which means if you invite them, because I don't know who they are. Because I'm in my office meeting you all day. So it would really help. That's why you can't get an appointment. Okay? So let's just pray and off we go. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Lord, thanks for the night. Thanks for the gift of fellowship, being together. For the work that you have done in this parish, the good work that's begun, and for all that you have yet to do in and through us. Lord, we want to say that we are up for the challenge, that we are in, that we will do whatever you ask, because we trust you and we know we're not alone. We get to walk with each other and behind you. So give us all the grace that we need to grab the baton, to run the race, and to keep our eyes on Jesus. We ask it all through Christ our Lord. Amen. All right. May Almighty God bless you, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Have a great night.